Hello, my name is Jocelyn Sloan. I'm a graduate student at the University of North Dakota working on my master's degree in cybersecurity. Today's presentation will be on the cybersecurity challenges encountered and the appropriate responses towards them during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. The entire world changed dramatically during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the United States, these changes were particularly notable during the months of March and April 2020. Before COVID-19 was really a thing, nearly all of the employees worked on site at offices and production facilities. Sure, there were a few working remotely, but they often had extenuating circumstances such as a prolonged illness. At that time, phishing attempts were primarily poorly written attempts to spoof company executives, along with the occasional overseas rich widow who wanted help getting millions of dollars out of the country. We were all free to come and go as we pleased without significant restrictions. As the virus spread quickly across America, the advice and regulations changed frequently. The recommendations put forth on Monday by the CDC or the governor might very well change before the week was out. And so they did. By the end of March, most of the USA workforce was either furloughed or working remotely. Phishing scams changed to being related almost entirely to the pandemic, and people had very specific instructions to follow when we left our homes. To give you an idea of how quickly things changed, the first known cases of the coronavirus, known as COVID-19, were discovered in China in December 2019. A month later, the first cases were discovered in the USA, but testing was limited and nobody was too worried yet. Anecdotal stories of people becoming sick following large tech gatherings began to appear on Twitter and in other places. By March 1st, large gatherings, including the NCAA convention, the NCAA March Madness basketball tournaments, were canceled. In the medical world, things were changing too. On March 15th, in an attempt to not cancel all large gatherings, the CDC provided guidelines for hosting groups of more than 250 people. 2 days later, they abandoned those guidelines and advised canceling the gatherings altogether and avoiding groups of more than 10. Truly, we went from allowing gatherings of 250 people to limiting that to just 10 in 2 days. The following week, public schools closed and began formulating plans to educate students remotely, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz issued a stay-at-home order, again effective just 2 days in the future. By the end of the week, President Trump released federal funding to taxpayers in the form of stimulus checks. The promise of stimulus checks was quickly followed by attempts to scam Americans out of their stimulus check money. On April 22, 2020, KnowBe4, a company that monitors phishing scams, reported that email threats related to the COVID-19 had reached 5 million individual email messages per day. The rate of growth for phishing scams had grown at a rate that seemed to mirror that of the virus itself. With quickly changing guidelines, as with any change, comes anxiety and fear. No one enjoys unexpected changes, especially those that disrupt our everyday routines. When Governor Walz issued the stay-at-home order, IT staff were given just 2 days to get everyone ready to work remotely. But we had to be careful. Malware and phishing scammers were busy too. Early in the battle against the coronavirus, Johns Hopkins University released a map of the virus outbreak. As the virus was hitting America, hackers created a copycat site of the Johns Hopkins map. Many people did not yet have the real website bookmarked, so they discovered the site via search engine. Visitors to the new site were prompted to download and install a browser plugin. Unfortunately, the copycat site contained malware, which was installed onto users' computers. This was the first detected malware infection related to the COVID-19. But the malicious actors were far from done. They knew that people were feeling anxious and that certain items were in short supply. Medical-grade gloves, masks, cleaning wipes, and even toilet paper were out of stock in the store. And they knew that people would be receiving an unexpected income in the form of stimulus checks. Hackers gathered their best resources and attacked. They sent a variety of emails to everyone, capitalizing on human emotions, the need for information, collaboration, supplies, and a functionable computer. Other malicious actors focused on text message scams. In the UK, where there were laws and fines to motivate people to stay home, people received text messages reporting violations and inciting them to pay their fines. But all of these were scams. As previously mentioned, while the biological virus grew across the planet and in Minnesota, so too did the number of phishing templates. During the month of March 2020, phishing templates used by malicious actors grew from a mere 5 to almost 100 different templates. During the month of March, and a few weeks later, the number of daily messages related to COVID-19 would surge to a record high of 500,000 messages per day. But what was the primary goal of these phishing attempts? What happens when bad actors gain credentials? They would try to get your credentials, and then compromised credentials are, of course, a problem with authentication. But that's only one part of the problem with phished credentials. Once the authentication process is compromised, the confidentiality and integrity of all data accessed by that person is also at risk. To reiterate, when a user falls subject to a phishing scheme, his or her credentials become compromised. Until remediation steps are complete, the confidentiality and integrity of data transferred by that user is inherently at risk. Furthermore, emails sent using stolen credentials are virtually indistinguishable from those sent by the legitimate user. The messaging server cannot tell which connection is the rightful user. Thus, the authenticity of all subsequent messages cannot be guaranteed until access has been terminated and the account is resecured. To make matters worse, if compromised credentials are used to gain access to saved files, they compromise the confidentiality of the data itself. Then, stolen credentials have resulted in the loss of both the authenticity and confidentiality of the data storage systems. Also, bad actors frequently use stolen credentials of one account to send phishing messages to everyone else in the address book. Note that such a message would not actually be sent by the legitimate user, but the server would recognize the message as having been sent with valid credentials. Thus, the email recipients receive a phishing message from an account they recognize, perhaps even containing the promise of a document they've been waiting for. Phishing attacks therefore result in the phishing attacks that result in an actual credential compromise is one of the most nefarious, others might say the most useful tool for malicious actors. Stolen credentials have the potential to compromise all three aspects of the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. The use of multi-factor authentication is a viable and perfect defense against the credential compromise. In short, multi-factor authentication should be used for every possible circumstance in which it is possible to use multi-factor authentication. If you can use multi-factor, do it. On March 25th, in the midst of a virus outbreak across America, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz joined many other leaders and issued a stay-at-home order for all citizens of Minnesota. The stay-at-home order would begin in 2 days, which led to a great many challenges for IT staff. The first challenge, besides the ongoing malware and phishing attacks, was the lack of portable computing hardware. There were 0 affordable laptops available in our area. IT staff would have to wait for subsequent shipments to arrive. Some staff required scanners and special software to do their jobs. Would the programs function correctly via remote connection? IT staff didn't know, but we installed the software and just hoped for the best. In the meantime, it became evident that people were willing to work from their personal computers at their homes. Allowing personal computers to connect directly to the corporate network might seem like an efficient method to connect a bunch of remote workers, but fast and secure rarely go hand in hand. As an example, remote desktop connection is a fast and easy way to connect a small number of remote workers directly into their PCs at work. However, remote desktop protocol is also well known as the #1 attack vector for ransomware infections. You know, where the bad guys encrypt all your files and then demand thousands of dollars in Bitcoin to give them back. Nobody wants to deal with a ransomware attack, especially when working remotely. The company needs to provide virtual private network connections for all staff who connect remotely. That is, if the person is not sitting at their desk inside the building, they should be using a VPN connection. This is doubly true for those connecting from personal computers, and connecting via a secure website into the corporate network is the safest way to reduce attack vectors for remote workers. In conclusion, the pandemic crisis sneaked quietly into the lives of most Americans. During that time, medical guidelines and government mandates change frequently. IT staff work together to keep the staff and data safe from a variety of phishing and malware attacks. The point here is best practices are important, especially during a crisis. Security staff cannot and should not take shortcuts. We must be ever vigilant and watchful. Malicious actors are opportunistic. IT staff must keep their guard up and be ready to protect both staff and data.